When Daniel moved into his new apartment, he thought he had finally found peace. After a messy divorce and the suffocating silence of a house filled with memories, the modest one-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood felt like a fresh start. The building was old, built sometime in the 1960s, with narrow stairwells that smelled faintly of dust and varnish. The rent was low, suspiciously low, but Daniel convinced himself it was simply because of the age of the place. On the day he moved in, a man appeared at his door. He was tall, broad-shouldered, maybe in his late 40s, with neatly combed hair and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Welcome," the man said warmly, extending a hand. "I'm Mr. Gray. I live just across the hall. If you need anything, tools, a cup of sugar, a helping hand, you know where to knock." Daniel shook his hand, finding it oddly cold and damp. Still, he was grateful for the gesture. In a city where neighbors barely acknowledged each other, it was refreshing to meet someone friendly. Over the next few weeks, Daniel settled in. He worked late nights at the office, returned home exhausted, and often caught brief glimpses of Mr. Gray in the hallway. Sometimes Gray carried heavy grocery bags, other times he shuffled quickly into his apartment with something wrapped in black trash bags. Once, Daniel saw him dragging what looked like a large, blood-stained tarp. When Daniel hesitated, Gray noticed his stare, chuckled softly, and said, "Hunting trip. Messy business." Daniel nodded awkwardly, trying not to appear suspicious. After all, this was America, people hunted all the time. But something about the way Gray licked his lips as he said it sent a chill down Daniel's spine. At night, strange noises came from across the hall. Thuds, scraping sounds, and sometimes muffled groans that made the hair on the back of Daniel's neck stand up. He tried to rationalize, maybe Gray was a taxidermist, maybe he had plumbing problems, but deep down, an unease began to take root. One evening, Gray invited Daniel over for dinner. "It's the least I can do," Gray insisted. "You're new here. Let me make you feel at home." Daniel considered refusing, but politeness got the better of him. When he stepped into Gray's apartment, the first thing that hit him was the smell. It wasn't rotten exactly, but thick, metallic, like raw meat left too long in the open. He tried to mask his discomfort as Gray ushered him to the dining table. The apartment was immaculately clean, almost too clean. No family photos, no clutter, just white walls and perfectly arranged furniture. A single, dim lamp lit the room, casting long shadows. Gray served steak. Thick, juicy, almost unnaturally red. "My specialty," he said with pride. Daniel took a hesitant bite. The flavor was rich, intense, unlike any beef he'd tasted before. Gray watched him closely, eyes gleaming. "Good, isn't it?" he asked. Daniel forced a smile, nodding. But something about the taste unsettled him. He couldn't shake the thought that it wasn't beef at all. As the days turned into weeks, the neighborhood whispers reached Daniel's ears. People said Gray had lived in the building for over a decade, but no one seemed to know much about him. Tenants came and went, often moving out abruptly. Some claimed they heard screams in the night. Others spoke of missing pets, even missing people. Daniel tried to ignore it, tried to convince himself he was imagining things. But one night, returning home late, he noticed something. Outside Gray's door was a thin trickle of dark liquid seeping out onto the hallway carpet. It smelled faintly metallic. Before he could react, the door opened. Gray stood there, smiling as always, blocking the view inside. "Ah, Daniel," he said softly. "Up late again? You really should get some rest." Daniel nodded quickly, retreating into his apartment, but his heart was pounding. He couldn't deny it anymore, something was very, very wrong with his neighbor. That night, as Daniel lay in bed, he swore he heard it, a faint scream, muffled, followed by the unmistakable sound of chopping. And for the first time since moving in, he locked his bedroom door. Daniel's sleep grew shallow, restless. He woke up often in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, listening to the muffled noises drifting from across the hall. Sometimes they sounded like dragging, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. Other times there were faint whimpers, as if someone was trying to scream with a gag in their mouth. At first, Daniel told himself it was paranoia. Maybe Gray was butchering animals from his supposed hunting trips. But the problem was the timing. The noises always came late, after midnight, when the building was silent. Too deliberate, too human. One evening, Daniel returned home earlier than usual. As he climbed the dim stairwell, he heard Gray's voice behind the door, low and soothing. At first he thought Gray was on the phone, but then he realized he was whispering directly to someone inside. "It'll all be over soon," Gray said, his tone almost affectionate. "You'll be part of me. Forever." Daniel froze mid-step, his skin crawling. A faint sob followed. Then a loud thud, like a body hitting the floor. Daniel's first instinct was to call the police. But what would he say? That his neighbor might be, what? A murderer? A cannibal? He had no proof, just suspicions and unsettling sounds. He forced himself inside his own apartment, locked the door, and tried to steady his breathing. He couldn't ignore this forever. The next day, he casually asked the building superintendent about Gray. The old man frowned. "Strange fellow, that one. Pays his rent in cash, always on time. Keeps to himself. Don't know much else." "Why do you ask?" Daniel hesitated. He invited me over once." Something felt off. The superintendent shrugged. "Look, kid, you're not the first to say that. But unless he's breaking the law, I can't do much." Then, leaning closer, he added in a hushed tone, "I will say this, though, ever notice how many tenants don't stay long on that floor?" That night, Daniel heard it again, this time, unmistakably a scream, cut short. He jumped from his bed, trembling. He pressed his ear to the wall, straining to listen. The scream was followed by the scraping of metal, then silence. The next morning, curiosity overcame fear. As Daniel left for work, he noticed Gray's door slightly ajar. Inside, in the dim light, he glimpsed something on the floor. A shoe. A woman's shoe. Fresh blood smeared across the tile. Before he could process what he was seeing, the door creaked open wider. Gray stood there, smiling, his eyes cold. "Daniel," he said smoothly. "You're up early." Daniel stammered something about leaving for work and bolted down the stairs. His heart raced the entire way to the subway. For the rest of the day, he couldn't focus. His mind replayed the shoe, the blood, Gray's knowing smile. He thought about calling the police, but his words felt absurd even in his own head. Still, he knew he couldn't keep quiet much longer. That evening, when he returned, he found a small package at his door. There was no name, no note. Inside was a piece of meat, raw, red, wrapped in butcher's paper. And on top of it, a slip of paper scrawled with shaky handwriting. "You liked it once. You'll like it again." Daniel's stomach lurched. He dropped the package, bile rising in his throat. He staggered inside, slamming the door shut. Across the hall, he heard a laugh. Low, slow, deliberate. Gray was watching. And Daniel finally understood, he was no longer just a neighbor. He was a target. Daniel barely slept. Every creak in the hallway made him jump, every shadow stretched longer than it should. He kept the lights on all night, clutching a kitchen knife like it was his last line of defense. By morning, he was pale, exhausted, and paranoid. He knew he couldn't live like this. He needed proof, something undeniable that would make the police listen. That evening, he bought a cheap audio recorder from a corner electronics store. If Gray really was keeping someone in there, the sounds alone would be enough to raise suspicion. Daniel placed the recorder by the wall they shared, pressed record, and sat in silence. Hours passed. Then, just after midnight, it began. First, the dragging noise. Something heavy scraping across the floor. Then muffled crying, clearly human. Daniel's pulse quickened as he leaned closer. Gray's voice followed, low and chilling. "Stop struggling. You'll only make it worse." A scream ripped through the silence, raw and desperate. Daniel clamped his hand over his mouth, trembling, but he didn't stop recording. He forced himself to listen as the scream dissolved into choked sobs, then silence, then the sound of cutting. Wet, methodical. By morning, Daniel was shaking as he replayed the tape. The sounds were clear, undeniable. He called the police, voice frantic, and told them everything. 2 officers arrived that afternoon. They were polite, skeptical. Daniel played the recording, expecting them to react in horror. Instead, they exchanged glances. "Sir," one officer said, "this could be anything. A TV show. A movie. You don't have proof this came from your neighbor's apartment." Daniel felt his stomach sink. What about the package? The blood? The screams? The officer shook his head. "Unless we have probable cause, we can't search his place. If you see something concrete, like an actual victim, call us immediately." They left Daniel standing in his doorway, furious and helpless. That night, as if mocking him, Gray knocked on his door. When Daniel opened it, Gray was holding a covered dish. "Thought you might like some dinner," Gray said, smiling. "You've seemed so tired lately." Daniel's eyes flicked to the dish, bile rising in his throat. "No, thanks." Gray tilted his head, still smiling. "You sure? You liked it last time." Daniel slammed the door in his face. Moments later, he heard Gray's laughter echoing through the hall. Over the next week, things escalated. Daniel began finding more packages at his door, smaller cuts of raw meat, always with a note. "For you. Fresh. Don't waste it." One night, as Daniel returned home, he noticed something new. On the doorframe of Gray's apartment, faint streaks of blood had seeped into the wood. Daniel's stomach churned. He needed more proof. Something visual. So the next day, he ordered a small camera online. He planned to place it in the hallway, aimed at Gray's door. If Gray dragged anything, or anyone, in or out, Daniel would catch it. But as he unboxed the camera in his living room, a slip of paper slid under his door. In blocky handwriting, it read, "Spying is dangerous, Daniel." Daniel froze, staring at the paper. He hadn't told anyone about the camera. He hadn't even set it up yet. Gray knew. And worse, Gray was watching him too. Daniel didn't leave his apartment for 2 days. He kept the blinds shut, the lights dim, and his phone clutched in his hand. Every so often, he thought about calling the police again, but what could he say? "My neighbor knows I bought a camera. They'd think he was paranoid." On the 3rd night, the silence broke. A knock at his door, 3 slow, deliberate taps. He froze, heart hammering. Another knock, harder this time. Then Gray's voice, muffled but playful. "Daniel, you've been so quiet. Are you avoiding me?" Daniel didn't move. He held his breath. "I know you're in there," Gray continued, his tone darkening. "I can hear you breathing." Daniel's skin crawled. He gripped the knife he kept on his coffee table, his hands slick with sweat. Finally, the footsteps receded, and the hallway fell silent again. That night, sleep took him only in short, panicked bursts. At one point, he woke to the faint sound of humming, an eerie lullaby drifting through the wall from Gray's apartment. Beneath it, something else. A metallic clinking. Chains. The next day, Daniel couldn't take it anymore. He called his friend Marcus, one of the few people he trusted. When Marcus arrived, Daniel shoved the recorder and the blood-stained note into his hands. "You believe me, right? This guy's not just weird, he's dangerous." Marcus frowned, replaying the tape. His face paled at the screams, but he still tried to stay rational. "Dan, this is bad, but you need actual proof. Photos. Video. Something solid." Daniel nodded. "That's why I bought the camera. He knows, Marcus. He's watching me. Then we'll set it up together," Marcus said firmly. "Tonight." That evening, under the cover of darkness, they placed the tiny camera in the hallway vent across from Gray's door. Hidden, almost invisible. Daniel finally felt a sliver of hope. But at 3 a.m., that hope turned to terror. A sound woke him, footsteps dragging something heavy. He rushed to his laptop, pulling up the live feed from the camera. His blood ran cold. On the screen, Gray emerged from his apartment, dragging a large, lumpy black bag down the hall. The bag twitched. Daniel's stomach dropped. Someone was inside. He grabbed his phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands. "This is it," he hissed. "They can't ignore this." But just as the dispatcher answered, the screen flickered, static. Then black. Daniel cursed, smacking the laptop. The feed was gone. Moments later, a loud clang echoed from the hallway, followed by silence. He sprinted to the door and pressed his ear against it. Nothing. When he finally dared to open it a crack, the hall was empty. The bag, gone. Back inside, Daniel's phone buzzed. An unknown number. A text. "You shouldn't watch things that aren't meant for you." Attached was a still image from his own hidden camera. The shot showed Daniel and Marcus crouched by the vent, installing it. Gray had seen everything. And worse, he had control of the camera now. Daniel barely slept after the message. Every creak of the building felt like footsteps, every shadow seemed alive. He unplugged his laptop, turned off his phone, but the fear didn't leave. By morning, Marcus came back, trying to calm him down. "He's messing with your head, Dan. It's psychological warfare. He wants you to panic." Daniel shook his head violently. "No, Marcus. This isn't just a game. He knows everything. He was inside my apartment, he had to be. How else would he get that image?" Marcus rubbed his face, exhausted. "Okay. Let's change the locks. Let's." But then, Daniel noticed something on his kitchen table. A small box wrapped in butcher's paper, smeared with dark stains. His stomach dropped. He hadn't put it there. With trembling hands, he opened it. Inside lay a severed finger, pale and stiff, with a wedding band still on it. A note underneath read, "For when you feel lonely." Marcus gagged, stumbling back. Daniel's vision blurred as bile rose in his throat. "We have to call the police right now," Marcus said, voice shaking. He reached for his phone. But before he could dial, Daniel's television flickered on by itself. The screen showed grainy footage, Daniel, asleep in his bed, filmed from inside his bedroom. Marcus froze. "Oh my God. He's been inside while you slept." The video cut abruptly, replaced by words scrawled in blood-red font. "Smile for the camera, Daniel." Daniel tore the TV's plug from the wall, but the image lingered for another few seconds, as if mocking him, before finally vanishing. Marcus grabbed him by the shoulders. "Listen to me, we're leaving. Pack a bag. You can't stay here." They stuffed what they could into a duffel and bolted for the door. But when Daniel swung it open, his breath caught. There, on the floor, lay another box. Larger this time. Slowly, he opened it. Inside was a human jawbone, teeth still intact. And beneath it, a photo of Daniel himself, taken from just over his shoulder, while he had been unwrapping the first box. Marcus cursed, pulling him back inside. He's watching every move. This guy is unhinged. Daniel collapsed onto the couch, hands covering his face. Why me? What does he want from me? The answer came quickly, in the form of another message buzzing on his phone. You've already been chosen. Stop running. The phone vibrated again. A video file. Daniel hesitated before pressing play. The footage showed a dimly lit basement. Chains hung from the ceiling, stained with rust, and something darker. On the ground, a figure writhed, gagged and bound, their muffled screams filling the room. Then Gray stepped into frame. He looked directly into the camera and smiled. Your turn soon, Daniel. The screen went black. Daniel dropped the phone, shaking uncontrollably. Marcus muttered, we need the cops. Now. But Daniel wasn't sure the police could stop this anymore. Gray wasn't just tormenting him. He was preparing him. Preparing him for something far worse. Daniel and Marcus drove through the night, desperate to escape the suffocating grip of Gray. Every pair of headlights in the distance felt like pursuit, every car behind them lingered too long. Marcus kept glancing at the rearview mirror. Just keep driving, Daniel muttered, eyes fixed on the road ahead. We can't stop. But miles away from the city, the GPS suddenly glitched, rerouting itself over and over until the screen froze on one destination, Graywood Asylum. Marcus cursed under his breath. This is a sick joke. He hacked the GPS. Daniel's phone buzzed again. A new message lit up the screen. Come home, Daniel. Before Marcus could react, the car engine sputtered, coughed, and died on a deserted stretch of road. Smoke hissed from under the hood. They were stranded. A single street lamp flickered nearby, and beneath its weak glow sat another box. Daniel's heart pounded as he stepped out and opened it. Inside were dozens of photographs, each one of him, taken across the past month, buying groceries, walking to work, brushing his teeth. Even sleeping. Gray had been with him every second. The final photo chilled him to the bone. It showed Marcus, slumped in the driver's seat, throat cut wide open. Daniel spun around. Marcus was gone. Marcus, he screamed into the night. A sound came from the trees. Wet, guttural, like something feeding. He stumbled toward it, branches clawing his face. And there, under the faint moonlight, he saw Marcus's body, lifeless, propped against a tree. His eyes had been removed, sockets empty. Behind the body stood Gray. He wasn't a shadow anymore. He was flesh, grinning ear to ear, his face pale and leathery, eyes wild and unblinking. His butcher's apron dripped crimson. Finally, Gray whispered. We're face to face. Daniel tried to run, but Gray was impossibly fast. He slammed Daniel against a tree, pressing a cold blade to his throat. You've been chosen because you see, Gray said, his voice low, almost reverent. You read the files. You opened the door. That makes you mine. Daniel thrashed, but Gray dragged him deeper into the woods, toward an abandoned structure looming in the distance, its windows boarded, walls collapsing. Graywood Asylum. Inside, the stench of rot and iron filled the air. Chains rattled, cages lined the walls, and bones littered the floor. In the center stood a table stained dark with countless horrors. Gray forced Daniel down onto it. You'll join them, he whispered. Piece by piece. Daniel's screams echoed into the night as the knife rose. The last thing he saw was Gray's monstrous grin, lit by the dull glow of a single swinging bulb. And then, darkness. Weeks later, a new thread appeared on the dark web forum. Its title. Smile for the camera, Daniel's cut. The file contained hours of footage from Graywood Asylum. Daniel's final moments, every scream, every pleading breath, captured in grotesque detail. And the last frame froze on Daniel's lifeless face, eyes wide, mouth open in terror. Beneath it, a single message. Who's next?